Hey everyone, welcome into Patterns Tell Stories. I'm your host Klaus, and today we're going to be talking about NASA. I got here with me my co-host Garrett. How's it going, man?
Good, man. I'm glad to be here. How are you doing?
Good. Just got a new microphone, so that's sounds pretty damn good from this side. So
thanks, dude. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're gonna get into NASA today with the UAP report coming out that they had a conference about, I think, a few months ago. That was kind of underwhelming from what I remember. I think I did a podcast about it around that time, encouraging people to have some patience with it. I've kind of changed my mind about that a little bit in the interim. So with recent stuff that's come out about Sean Kirkpatrick and his dealing with David Grush and the whistleblower accusations that he's come out with, and just the general UFO hearing, he's basically been a pretty big dick about it. He wrote something on LinkedIn, I believe, a scathing kind of letter that said he was insulted by the hearings, and basically just kind of crocodile tears about how he's not being treated fairly. But in reality, he was told by David Grush about this stuff years ago and then never followed up with him. So Sean Kirkpatrick and AARO are not really coming across as too, credible right now when it comes to these whistleblower complaints. It sounds like Sean Kirkpatrick isn't being honest and isn't really being transparent. I mean, it's kind of obvious that's the case when their Twitter account, the official AARO Twitter account, hasn't tweeted since their initial tweet.
Zero.
I guess it was like, I don't know, like a fucking year ago now, basically, that they said they were going to be transparent. They had like a picture up there of like Moultrie and Kirkpatrick, and everyone was like super stoked. It's been a year and they haven't tweeted shit. So I kind of made the point, like, you have all the time in the world to go on LinkedIn and bitch about David Grush when you haven't even returned his messages, but you can't take 2 seconds out of your day to tweet something to the public and give us an update about UFOs. That's pretty disingenuous from my point of view. Yeah, I don't know what you thought about his letter.
I have no reason to believe that these three whistleblowers that just testified and gave their testimony in front of this open hearing, I have no reason to believe that these people are lying or that they're dishonorable. All signs indicate that Dave Grush was an honorable, honest, qualified individual. And the things that he's saying in this report, quite frankly, Kirkpatrick, the fact that he's only tweeted, like you said, 1 time or 2 times, I don't even know, but it was for what they were presenting that portal to be, it seemed like it was going to really connect people and take away the stigma surrounded with reporting these things. I don't think our service members got that reassurance. Like, I think that they just felt like it was some sketchy, they're going to call somebody and they're going to get put on some list, and then their career might be in jeopardy because they aren't being told that this is given the proper attention or being put through the proper channels. It seems like anybody that was giving any credence to there being something to this was getting gaslit. Even the people like Luis Elizondo, who he ran the Pentagon program to study these things. I thought that the Kirkpatrick letter was trash.
Absolutely. And
I thought it was trash because he had every opportunity to follow up. Dave Grush said that there were multiple firsthand accounts, and he had said this with an attorney who was a former inspector general. There seems to be reprisal for if people come forward. And that's exactly the vibes I was getting from AARO in the first place, was like, I don't think that they're going to get the full support because it seems like the DOD has a history of gaslighting the people that say there's something to this topic. And there's a history of obfuscation, clearly. And to my understanding also is like they even though they tried to muddy the waters on Luis Elizondo, that Susan Go lady still says that Luis Elizondo is advising the Space Force on classified topics. Yeah. So like anybody who has a big problem with Luis Elizondo can go call the fucking Space Force because apparently they think they're better at vetting their top advisors than the Space Force is.
Yeah.
And I just think that there's a lot of baloney coming from them, and there's a history of obfuscation. And I think it's a shame because, like Tim Burchett said, they work for us.
Yep.
Yeah, dude, we'll see what happens moving forward. I think that Congress is fired up over this, and we see our great pilots coming forward, and they have no reason to lie. That Republican guy, what's his name, Mike Turner, he has a reason to lie. And
it's funded by Lockheed, basically. And the other thing that Kirkpatrick hasn't delivered is that fucking website that they said would be set up in order for people to report their UFO sightings, for even civilians to do that. And it's been, I don't know, a year. Like, it's been a year, and you could have ChatGPT set that shit up in fucking 10 minutes, basically. And I don't know, I guess there's like security or whatever. But come on, like you gotta, put two and two together. And it's very clear that they're intentionally not moving this forward in a transparent way for the public. I don't know. It's just really frustrating. And that's what makes it really tough for me to trust the NASA report that's coming out, was Kirkpatrick's involvement in that original NASA presentation. He had probably spoken the most by the end of that thing. They were all kind of looking to him for answers. They were all asking him questions about like what they should be doing. And clearly NASA has a lot of influence from the DoD. Like, I don't know. It's clear Kirkpatrick is making an attempt to control the narrative from where I'm sitting. I think he tries to play it off as, we're just helping them out. But it's like the committee themselves aren't using classified data. They're making it a point not to use classified data so they can be transparent with the American people. And the fact that DoD is there trying to assist them without, them requesting classified data, it just seems weird to me. Why would the DoD be involved if they weren't using classified data? Like, what is the point? If they're doing this whole study to try to come up with a way to better understand UAP from a civilian standpoint, what the fuck is the DoD doing there? What is Kirkpatrick doing there besides giving his opinion from a military perspective, and potentially even more nefarious things, in my opinion, based on how he's reacted to the whistleblower hearing? So I don't know. That's kind of how I see it. NASA themselves, they don't really need to have DoD influence in order to hide stuff from the public, as we've seen over decades. From the foundation of NASA, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory was moved from the Army to NASA. So that in itself shows that NASA has had a huge military presence within its organization since the beginning. I think it's clear. But just the addition of AARO into the NASA study makes it that much harder to believe that they're coming at this from a good faith, motivational way.
Dude, to be quite honest, NASA has never, to my understanding, had an interest or been tasked with studying UFOs. Like, plain and simple. They're not in the business. That's not what NASA was for, was to look for flying saucers, right? So A lot of the times historically, when NASA's been asked about UFOs, they say, this isn't our job. Ask the Department of Defense. Ask someone else. Ask the CIA. Don't ask us, because that's not our mission, is to look for UFOs, right?
Why do you think that is?
What? That they try to say, ask somebody else?
Yeah. Do you think they don't have data on it, or do you think they are just obfuscating?
Look. So I know, based on what the small amount that I've read of the history of these organizations, departments, whatever you want to call them. Are you familiar with the Clementine mission, the moon mission, the mission to map the moon, I believe it was?
Not that one specifically, but
it's my understanding, and we can double check this too, The Clementine mission was a joint mission between NASA and the DoD to map the moon's surface. That's always something that struck me as like, what does the Department of Defense have to do with the moon's surface?
That's interesting.
It's something that like that happened a while ago. That was over 20 years ago, if I'm correct. There's things that are classified about space, or there's things that are like, to me, the history of NASA and the guys that are surrounded with the like foundation of NASA, it's so weird.
And just the moon itself, like why haven't we gone back? And unless we have, but yeah, man, it's bizarre. It's fucking weird to me. Like, is there just nothing there, or did we find what we were looking for? Seems like an important outpost to the solar system. You'd think militarily it would be a strategic place to have a base, which I guess they've talked about, but not really. Makes you wonder, would they not take that as a serious strategic advantage? And if not, then why not? I don't know. It's just weird to me that they haven't gone back, whether or not it's NASA or the DoD, unless they have, and it's classified or something.
Did you know that the moon is 1/400th the distance between the Earth and the sun, and that the moon is also 400 times smaller than the sun? So that makes it to where when we look in the sky, the moon circle and the sun circle are like the same exact size, and they can cover each other. And that is like a really cool anomaly. And then the other cool thing, the moon takes 27.32 days. I'm going to butcher that, bro. I don't even want to talk about this shit because, there's a lot of weird things about the moon that are creepy, bro. But I don't want to be acting like I don't think the moon is real or anything. Like that's where I felt like that conversation was drifting. And I don't think that's the case at all.
The moon's not real, man. You're not real. So fucking no. There's weird shit, man. Like Werner von Braun said in like it was like a 1969 Time magazine article about the Apollo landing. But he said the neutral point for the gravitational attraction between the Earth and the moon was approximately 43,500 miles from the lunar surface. This was over 20,000 miles further away from the surface of the moon if the moon were only 1/6 of the gravitational attraction of the Earth. So there's some weird thing, I guess, where the moon is supposed to be at a neutral point, but it is not. There's a lot of weird shit like that.
And it's always facing the Earth too.
Yeah, that is a crazy one too. Like, how does that even work? It's insane. I don't know, man. This guy, Joseph Farrell, has like this whole chapter on moon anomalies, and it's kind of weird. A lot of it seems like it is about to be solved because all these questions could be answered by like one discovery, Dude,
if they found anything up there on any of those missions that wasn't just dust and rocks, that shit is crazy. And so far, I'm pretty sure all they brought back is dust and rocks.
Yeah, the other weird thing is there was supposed to be, an Apollo 18 and an Apollo 19. Those missions were canceled, but they were already paid for. So, and they said it was a funding issue. So that makes you wonder. Like,
what?
Yeah.
What was the last one? 17?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, altogether there were supposed to be 10. So yeah, altogether there were supposed to be 10 lunar flights, and the Apollo 18 and 19 rockets were already paid for, and the astronauts trained and ready to go, and they were just canceled. So that's another weird fucking thing. But all these anomalies could actually be explained by like one discovery. It's caught my attention like in the past few weeks. Like there's just been crazy shit coming out scientifically in the past few weeks. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's metal that heals itself, the fucking semiconductor thing that actually cited I guess it wasn't the patent requester or patent filers who actually cited it, but the examiner, I guess, cited the Navy UFO patents by Salvatore Pye.
Yes, and I saw you posted that.
Yeah, that was crazy, man. And it's just like, and there were 5 total patents cited in that patent. So it's like, why? It's kind of a crazy coincidence that literally a Navy UFO patent was cited out of all the patents in the world. It was one of 2 American patents that were cited. So it's, I don't know, I find that really interesting. The people are trying to brush it off as it's all, this is just normal boilerplate stuff that happens. It's like, no, it's not. It's no one cites that patent. It's abandoned. Either people are fucking with us, or there is a good reason that it was cited. But anyway, back to the moon. But yeah, in the past week, there was a story about scientists finding a giant piece of radioactive granite inside the moon. Essentially, that shouldn't be there unless volcanic activity happened or there was water. It's a large deposit of radioactive granite, and it's weird because there is apparently no water on the moon. I'm reading from an article that came out on July 14th, so fairly recent. So there is a giant deposit of radioactive granite, and there's no water on the moon and no plate tectonics, which are usually required to create granite. So the theory is that it is made by volcanism, and there were volcanoes on the moon. So that was the 14th, right? January 14th. And then a article comes out today on a new study saying that beneath the layered crust, the moon's mantle sits atop what scientists think is a partially molten layer where clues to the moon's formation could lie. But according to this new study, there may not actually be this layer of mantle. So this is kind of throwing cold water on the volcanism piece of this thing. And, I might be getting this wrong, but it seems like all these theories are now kind of in doubt, basically. So where the fuck did this giant piece of granite come from? If there's no water, there's no plate tectonics, and there's no, I guess, partially molten layer of volcanism, where did this come from? And it's granite. It's like, that's not like some random shit just sitting in the moon.
So,
yeah.
Have you seen the rovers that they send on to scoop stuff and scoop samples on the moon? You know that those scoops are extremely sharp and extremely industrial grade, because the moon, apparently, it's very difficult to dig on the moon. You need to have the very proper tools, and you have to have very sharp tools to be able to break through the surface. And I'm blown away by everything you just said, dude. And I wanted you to know that, I know that in Apollo 12 and 13, that they did impact tests on the moon. They shook the moon.
Yep.
And apparently the moon, they used the term rang like a bell. And they said in these tests that they got the moon to shake for an hour. And I think the second test, it shook for 2 or 3 hours. And I still don't know what I don't know the nature of how I don't think I'm smart enough to understand the nature of how our moon operates, because volcanoes, man, how long ago would that have had to be? Or how old is the moon? That's a good one to look up.
It's older than the Earth, I guess. Apparently.
Really?
Yeah, that's what I read in Joseph Farrell's book 20 minutes ago. So if I'm wrong, blame that on him. But yeah, apparently that's the case. And then there's another very interesting thing he wrote in here. Command module pilot is CMP and ground control is GC. So this is from the transcript. CMP, what are you learning? GP, hotspots on the moon, Jack. CMP, where are your big anomalies? Can you summarize quickly? GC, Jack, we'll get that for you on the next pass. CMP, hey, I can see a bright spot down there on the landing site where they may have blown off some of that halo stuff. GC, Roger, interesting. Very go to kilo. CMP, hey, it's gray now and the number 1 extends. GC, Roger, we got it. And we copy, and that's all the way down there. Go to kilo. So when they say kilo, That means switch to a secure channel. Yeah, like a secure frequency in their communication. So they're changing their frequency to a more secure one, basically while they're talking about this bright spot at the landing site. Yeah, so they saw something clearly that they didn't want to have public if they're switching to a secure frequency. Another interesting thing, what is it? It's the gravity on the moon. So the moon is like 1/6 of the gravity of Earth, right? So you should be able to jump 6 times higher than you can on the Earth. They're not jumping 6 feet in the air, like on the moon footage. Like, I'm not saying like the fucking moon landing was fake, but I'm saying,
dude, can you imagine the mind fuck of landing on the moon? Like, them being like the first person, or you think the first, imagine, okay, the mind fuck of landing there, but imagine finding like a fork or like anything, dude. Anything they find on there is so shattering.
So basically, a lot of the people who talk about the moon landing being faked talk about the fact that the moon is like 1/6 the gravity of Earth. So when you see the footage of the moon landing, these astronauts don't get higher than, maybe 1.5 feet off the ground. And they should be going like 6 feet in the air, essentially, is the argument. So this kind of corroborates, what von Braun said before when I was talking about that neutral point of gravity. Farrell says the small heights achieved by the leaping astronauts on those Apollo landings is a strong indicator that we went to the moon. NASA concealed nothing. Had NASA wished to hoax the missions on a television stage or film set, it is hardly likely that it would have overlooked the obvious implications of leaps from astronauts that were far too short for a moon with 1/6 the gravity of Earth. So why the leaping at all? Why show everyone in the plainest possible fashion that the moon is a much more massive object than our pre-Apollo science had led us to believe? I'm probably going to take this part out because we're talking about like fake moon landings.
No worries.
But yeah, I found that interesting that he was saying, if the moon landing was fake, they'd have these fuckers flying 6 feet in the air instead of, 1.5 feet. So yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting that it was only, 1.5 feet when it should be 6 feet. I'm not sure what that means in terms of like scientific understanding of how gravity works on the moon. But I don't know. I had never heard that before I read this book. So it was interesting to me.
Yeah, and they might not fully grasp like how it fully should look. I mean, I don't know. That's the thing about if you watch a video of someone bouncing around on the moon, is like, I don't know what it's supposed to look like if someone is bouncing around. You know what I'm saying? Like it could be, and I also don't know how heavy all their gear is or how strong that astronaut is, or like there's a whole bunch of variables that could go into like why they're moving the way they're moving. Right. Dude, I wanted to bring up, I think that they went. First off, like 100%, I think they went. I think that when they went, if you look at the Apollo 11, that was the crew with Armstrong and Aldrin, and who was the last one? Collins, was that his name? I think it was. Anyway, those three, after they landed, dude, the press conference when they get back, they all look like spooks.
Oh yeah,
and
I remember that.
That set conspiracy theorists off. Because they were like, oh my God, what did they see? What happened? But like, to be quite honest, dude, based on what I've heard Edgar Mitchell say about going to the moon, like it probably really shakes up your like worldview a little bit. Yeah. So I'm not shocked. And especially they were the first guys. So like in terms of how they're supposed to act, I don't know how someone's supposed to act when they break history like that. But they did look spooked for some reason. And it was very interesting. It's worth checking out.
Yeah, especially if you think the moon landing is fake. Go watch that fucking video. They definitely went somewhere and saw something. Yeah, it is pretty wild.
Dude, the moon is so integral to the Earth's life. Like,
for sure.
If we didn't have the moon, we wouldn't have seasons. And if we didn't have seasons, we wouldn't be able to like really evolve advanced life the way it has evolved on Earth. And I know that that's like a pretty easy argument to make, like, oh, well, if this wasn't this way, we wouldn't have it. Like, quite frankly, the moon it does wonderful things for the way the Earth functions, and especially for our oceans. It's so integral to coral blooms and life cycles within the ocean that people really don't even understand are taking place. And it's so sad the more toxic our oceans are becoming. And people just kind of like look at something like the moon and just like take it for granted. The moon, long down the road, something like the moon would be really integral in trying to terraform a planet like Mars, I feel like, because it helps so much with the seasons and the life cycles of all these things that like is built into our Earth's like biosphere, if that makes sense.
And it's part of, the circadian rhythm of life.
Yes.
And, not to be gross, but like menstrual cycles and all that shit. It's integral. Yeah. It's almost like it was meant to be there. But yeah, I don't know. I guess the Russians, basically, I think they wrote a report in like the 70s that said it was like a literal spaceship. But I don't, yeah. What does it say? Yeah. In the two Soviet scientists proposed in the 1970s in the Soviet magazine Sputnik that the moon was in fact a gigantic artificial spaceship. Because the moon is apparently older than the Earth, it stands to reason that the capture model, I guess, yeah, he outlined like some models about how the moon came into Earth's orbit. No known mechanism can account for its current orbital mechanics. In short, it would appear that the moon had to have been braked, like a car brake, as it entered Earth's orbit, and in such a fashion as to assume its current position. As no known naturalist mechanism exists to explain such a braking, the only other explanation would appear that it had been intelligently guided to its current position. It is a celestial mechanics analog to parallel parking a car. Yeah, it's fucking nuts.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Briefly stated, the moon was parked, and that implies a pilot. So, I mean, I read that after I had read that whole thing about granite, and then the whole granite deposit.
Yeah, what's granite doing up there?
After all my research on, the pyramids and the piezoelectricity and all that stuff, it's kind of fucking with my head. I try not to like think about it too much, but it's definitely an interesting idea.
Speaking of Werner von Braun,
yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you before that. I wanted to ask you if you had seen the movie Elysium with Matt Damon, and it's like this like off.
We're living
planet.
it, man,
dude. What if the moon rocks and rich people are just gonna be like crashing on the moon while the Earth sucks, like in Elysium? That would be horrible.
I know. Well, I think they're trying to build their own fucking Elysium first.
Yeah.
They don't want to live on I mean, I guess Elon's cool with living on Mars, which
he wants to.
It looks like it would suck ass. But I don't know, whatever, go for it, dude.
Dude,
just spend all your fucking money like buying Twitter and tanking it and then going to some shitty ass planet. But like obviously had life and basically it's what Earth is going to be in however many years. But yeah, go fast forward Earth and live on Mars. I don't know. It's so weird to me.
What is Werner von Braun's like legacy in your eyes when you hear that guy's name? Like I know that people know that like he was a rocket scientist, but for those unfamiliar, he was like the head of he was the head of the Apollo programs, the manned moon missions.
Yeah.
And he was a German Nazi. He was an SS officer during World War II. And towards the end of the war, he ended up being captured by Allied forces, right? And I'm reading this book by a woman named Linda Hunt, who was a CNN reporter in the 80s and 90s, I think. And she wrote this great book called Secret Agenda. and she talks about how this man named Walter Jessel, who was a lieutenant in the army, he was like a Jewish man who had, before World War II ended, I guess he lived in Germany. He came to the United States and he joined the military and he fought against Germany. And he was one of the guys that interrogated Wernher von Braun and Walter Dornberger and like a lot of these rocket scientists, these Peenemünde guys. And Walter Jessel claims in his books that like these guys were maniacs. And that especially Walter Dornberger, who ended up being like one of the like he ended up being very high-ranking member of Bell Aerospace, if I'm correct. And
very interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very dark, dude. It's really dark. And Wernher von Braun, if you listen to Peter Levenda's presentation about the secret space program in Amsterdam, he talks about how after these Germans came to the United States, and Linda Hunt talks about it in Secret Agenda, how like we had our service members like that were very alarmed, and they didn't think that these guys were 100% loyal to the United States, right? And one of the things that happened was this like Hermes missile incident. Have you heard of that? I think it was out of White Sands Proving Grounds. And it was this incident where we had this Hermes missile go awry, and it landed outside of Juarez, Mexico. And according to Joseph Farrell, blasted a 40-foot crater in Juarez, Mexico. And,
wait, what book is that in?
This is I think it's in Roswell and the Reich. They talk about that. God. And it's something that like people can look up. There was this like incident where this missile that was being worked on by these German scientists went stray. And from what I understand, there's rumors that they had sabotaged the like guiding system of this thing. And that was like one of the explanations that they were offering to why Russia made it into space before us. Because that's something I also wanted to point out is like, whoa. Even though we got somebody on the moon, Russia took us way off guard, and they sent somebody into space. They had the first person in space. They put the first satellite, Sputnik, in space, and then they sent a dog. They sent a dog into space, man. Yeah, God, dude, poor dog. But that totally caught us off guard. And I think that's a big reason why we wanted to have these moon missions. But like the thing was, when we got Wernher von Braun, we were supposed to be like hooked up. Wernher von Braun was supposed to be the man. And we didn't make it into space first. So that makes you wonder, like, I don't know those things. I hear rumors and I read books about these
what rumors do you hear?
The Hermes missile incident, that was one rumor that like I'm scared to even bring up. But I know that like there's enough in the books that I just mentioned that like corroborates what I was saying. That
wait,
something
was that the fucking okay, yeah. So I saw this movie. I don't know if this is what you're talking about, but or like they did like a enactment of it called The 11th Grain. Have you seen that?
Oh, yes, that movie was insane, dude. I did see that movie.
And they had a video, like the dude showed the guy a video of a UFO like circling a missile and then just taking it out. So I don't know if it's probably not the same thing, but it just reminded me of that movie. And the guy like couldn't believe it. Yeah, it's pretty funny. I don't know if you remember that part, but yeah, the missile's just like cruising, and it was like way back. It looked like an old video. And yeah, the UFO was just like, matching the missile's speed and just like kind of zapped it out of the fucking sky. And we've heard that, in other encounters, but I don't know. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go on.
Yes. And I was also talking about Wernher von Braun and Walter Dornberger, right? So Wernher von Braun ended up being the head of Apollo. Walter Dornberger ended up being a board member for Bell. And before that, both of these guys worked together on this Peenemünde rocket program, right? And then, as I said, that guy, Walter Jessel, lieutenant in the Army, interviewed them, said that these guys sounded like cocky maniacs and that he didn't think that they should have security clearances and that this was not a great idea to bring them over, right? And then we know that Russia made it into space first. They put Sputnik into space. They put the doggy into space. And then we had to try to play catch up and put a man into space and land him on the moon. Well, and return him back to Earth safely. So the thing is like in those years at the end of World War II, we were talking about the Hermes missile incident out of White Sands Proving Grounds, right? And that test, I think it was for a V2 rocket. Germany was like the first country to determine or to develop long-range missiles. And that's why a lot of these rocket scientists were German. And before the space program even came to be, it was a rocket program. Like it was a military program at its very like foundation, right? Because a lot of these guys were rocket scientists who were working on military rockets. The V2 was like a rocket to like use in war. And we ended up using that type of technology to use for our like manned missions naturally, because they were flying the best and the furthest and the fastest. So like, yeah. Anyways, the thing that was concerning to me was in the book Secret Agenda by Linda Hunt. She says that Walter Dornberger and Warner von Braun were like back channel communicating classified information back and forth with each other. And that was something that I was like, what? Because it makes it sound like that should be a scandal if those things like, if these guys really, and so anyway, I was trying to figure out if you read about UFOs or like just even history in general, the end of World War II, you constantly hear about South America, Argentina, whatever. And I remember when Tom DeLonge went on Joe Rogan and he sounded like a maniac. I remember laughing at him and being like, dude, this guy sounds so crazy. He said that he thought that Roswell, if I'm correct, he said that Roswell, what crashed in Roswell was German, developed in Argentina, and it had all the hallmarks of reverse engineered alien craft. And I remember hearing that and going, oh, what? How would that even happen? And then I remember picking up some Joseph Farrell books, Peter Levenda books, and being like, oh my God, what the hell is going on right now? You find out that so many of these guys got away and they were like smuggling their technology and shit to South America, right? And so there's I can pull out a list of guys that made it there and lived full lives, and it would make you want to take a shower because it's disgusting. But dude, if there's a chance that they were like continuing some sort of like of their own breakaway bullshit after World War II in South America, well, I don't understand why like that part of U.S. history isn't looked at, or what is even going on over there. The only people I've seen like really investigate this is Peter Levenda and the MMA fighter Tim Kennedy, who had a Netflix show called like Hunting Hitler or something.
Did he really?
And wow. He made a whole show about how all these guys escaped to South America, and there's like German colonies in South America.
That's so crazy.
And
I know.
Peter Levenda got detained in one of them and almost got killed, I think.
So crazy.
And it's something that's people don't look into that. But I even heard that what was it? Bill Nelson, he's the head of NASA right now. He made a statement out of Argentina. He was like, we're going to get down to the bottom of this and blah, blah, blah. And like, dude, quite frankly, I don't care what they have to say about UFOs. I want to know what's about that stuff. You know what I'm saying? And when did that end? And how do we know that any of that bullshit isn't going on today? And I hate to paint a picture like that, because I do think that there are honorable people working at NASA. And I do think that like we landed on the moon and that we are going in the right direction. But But I do also think we have a huge problem with transparency. And like the fact is, like, the more I look into the history of NASA and these people that were supposedly reformed Nazis, is that even a thing?
No, because the fucking Prescott Bush like funded Hitler.
Yes.
So
yes.
It started before the war.
Yes.
Like there were American Nazis that basically like supported Hitler and supported all this stuff. And then, you know, they didn't go anywhere after the war. They were still around. They still had networks. Yeah, this shit didn't just like happen out of nowhere. There's just shitload of money that you know got put into this, and then after the war, clearly those networks were maintained, and I think it's still actually, you know, you can see it kind of crop up every now and then, even like especially recently. There is a quote from Nick Cook, like Hunt for Zero Point by Nick Cook is one of the ultimate like must reads, I think, for this subject when it comes to especially international aerospace dynamics after World War II. He really gets into the research, and he came into it as like a skeptic, but he's like, okay, here's this, you know, all these rumors of anti-gravity going into the black. I'm going to research it. He was like, I think he was like the editor of Jane's Defense Weekly. He really goes into how all this stuff happened after the war. And he's like super skeptical about it throughout the book. He's like, okay, I went to this conference, like this didn't make sense to me. And, you know, but he has these sources. And one of them is, I think he was like, you know, one of the top executives, I forget, at some defense contractor. And I talk about this quote all the time, but I just kind of want to read it because it really drills down to like what we're talking about here. And it leads to like what we might see happening that's just stayed the same over decades. But this is a conversation between himself and his source. And so his source says, when the Americans tripped over this mutant strain of nonlinear physics and took it back home with them, they were astute enough to realize that their homegrown scientific talent couldn't handle it, that it was beyond their cultural terms of reference. That's why they recruited so many Germans. The Nazis developed a unique approach to science and engineering, quite separate from the rest of the world, because their ideology, unrestrained as it was, supported a wholly different way of doing things. Von Braun's V2s are a case in point, but so is their understanding of physics. The trouble was, when the Americans took it all home with them, they found out too late that it came infected with a virus. You take the science on, you take on aspects of the ideology as well. And then Nick Cook asks, and the black world? He responds, well, there are different shades of black, of course. But what interests me is that the bit that is truly unaccountable is the part of the system that's been exposed longest to the virus. So in time, it will simply destroy itself. That, at least, is my earnest hope. So those paragraphs right there are like, I think, some of the most important words written about this whole fucking subject. This physics that they use, or that, you know, this anti-gravity physics is not Einsteinian. It is a different kind of frame of reference that this ideology allows, you know, the same ideology that allows you to, say, experiment on humans with radiation, you know, MK Ultra type shit. It's I just think it's really important.
So Kurt Debus, I'm probably butchering how you pronounce that. Kurt Debus, first director of the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, was a member of the SS and the SA and two other Nazi organizations who turned in a colleague to the Gestapo for making disloyal remarks. Theodor Zobel performed experiments on prisoners while in charge of wind tunnel operations. These are guys that we're bringing into the United States and giving immunity and hanging pictures of, and it's completely distorting the idea of like, I don't know, man. It's so strange. Because like you said, you even brought up Prescott Bush, dude. So for those who don't know, Prescott Bush was a senator from Connecticut, but he wasn't elected as a senator until 1952. Until then, from what I understand, he was like an attorney and a banker. And he was a banker
he was,
for Brown Brothers Harriman. Yes,
yep.
Brown Brothers Harriman. And
that's who Danny Sheehan talks about a lot. Yep.
And I advise people read about in 1942, the United States apparently seized a bank under the Trading with the Enemies Act. They seized a bank that Brown Brothers Harriman was involved with. And they apparently the Prescott Bush was like heavily involved with that as well. And
I think it was Thyssen or something. It was some German who he kind of partnered with to help fund Hitler, basically.
It's so weird. Another weird one was Henry Ford. You know that?
Oh, God. Yeah.
Dude, Henry Ford was he was given by Hitler like the highest honor a non-German could receive. He was given, it was called the the Grand Cross of the German Eagle. And the year before Henry Ford got it, Benito Mussolini got it. And apparently Hitler had a framed portrait of Ford in his office. And it was a common, dude, you see so history repeating itself. The propaganda is the same. If you study the propaganda that you saw in World War II, they were calling FDR and his New Deal a communist, and saying that he was in this communist conspiracy, and like it's so crazy how history repeats itself. And
speaking of that, we can talk about Marconi for a second, who was in Mussolini's fascist cabinet. And I was mentioning before how the stuff kind of you can kind of see it pop its head up every now and then around the world in news events when scandals happen. It's kind of the same kind of pattern. It's very interesting when you look at like the Marconi company, and they were involved in the Strategic Defense Initiative. The press referred to it as Star Wars, basically during the Reagan administration, which had a whole bunch of fucked up shit going on, but I'm not going to get into that. Yeah, essentially the Strategic Defense Initiative was, they wanted to develop technology that would put nuclear weapons, like it would overcome nukes basically and render them useless. So the only thing I can really think that would do that would be, what we see UFOs doing is that kind of technology. So it seemed like a kind of Manhattan Project for UFOs, which Lou has talked about, but this was basically just for weapons and to protect the interests of the United States. What he did was he opened it up to all of our allies and was like, hey, come sign up with us for this Strategic Defense Initiative, and we can develop all this stuff together. Back in the 80s, I guess it was like 1983. And even the head of NASA at the time, or I guess he was retired, but James Fletcher, he was the former head at the time. He basically like pushed for scientists to join in. Another interesting thing about the Strategic Defense Initiative was, Bobby Ray Inman.
Oh, right. I've heard that name before in weird contexts.
He's the guy who spoke to Bob Oshler about, kind of admitted that there were UFO programs, and Oshler recorded the conversation. You can go listen to it. I think it's up on YouTube. There's an article that I literally just found it today, and it talks about how he and the former Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, William Perry, were basically going around to universities and trying to convince people to conduct this research in a classified manner, kind of like bribing them with research money, saying, hey, we'll fund your research into this. You just have to keep it classified. And that's really super sketchy. And it's kind of crazy to know that Bobby Ray Inman was the one going around doing that stuff when he was talking about, UFO projects. But yeah, the Star Wars. So the Star Wars initiative by Reagan, they basically opened it up to all our allies, and Marconi Electronic Systems was one of the companies that decided to be part of that initiative. We're working on some pretty, I think, deep black projects with America and our defense industry. And, it makes me wonder kind of what happened with basically, I don't know if you know about all those suicides, quote unquote suicides by the scientists at Marconi. About one of the researchers who tracked all this stuff the most said there were about 25 deaths over, I guess, a few years from like 1982 to 1990. They were all like really weird suicides that a lot of people are kind of thinking that they obviously weren't, and that since they were all Marconi scientists, it was kind of connected to this strategic defense initiative and something to kind of keep them silent. So if that's the case, and the Star Wars initiative was meant to develop a technology that would render nuclear weapons useless, were these international UFO programs that were going on. And then when you look at who Marconi eventually was acquired by, General Electrics and Lockheed Electronics. These are all electronics divisions were bought up by British Aerospace, the giant conglomerate. They were basically made into their own American version of BAE Systems. They have a very, very special agreement with the United States when it comes to classified projects, special defense assessment or something like that, where the board of the company of BAE, or the top executives, don't even know what the fuck their people are working on, because they can't, because of the American classified stuff that's going on. So there's so much plausible deniability in that arrangement, that international arrangement, that I think there's a lot that can be going on there. And considering that Marconi was a fascist, and the guy who founded the company was in Mussolini's cabinet during the time that the Italian UFO crash happened. One of the other interesting parts of this is that a man named Jeffrey Patty, he was the vice chairman of the Conservative Party in the UK for 7 years, from 1990 to 1997. And during this time, he was the supervisory director of Leica Microsystems, which was a partner with Marconi. And then from 1990 to 1999, he was the chairman of Marconi Electronic Systems. And then in 1997, he was the marketing director for General Electric. And then General Electric became BAE, which then, kind of took over Marconi Systems. When I say these things kind of pop up every now and then, this is what I mean. So this guy, Jeffrey Patty, who was part of all this stuff I just talked about, he went on to become one of the founders of Strategic Communications Laboratories, SCL Group. Yeah, if that sounds familiar, it's because one of their spinoff companies is Cambridge Analytica. And
are you kidding me?
Nope. So yeah, SCL, Strategic Communication Laboratories, is basically a product of the British defense establishment. This guy, Jeffrey Patty, basically took over a bunch of British companies like Marconi, ran these things and then put them under basically BAE, British Aerospace, and then went on to found SCL, which was Cambridge Analytica. SCL was, basically part of the military establishment in Britain, specialized in psyops. Like that was their thing, was military psyops. And they used those military psyops on the American people. And, obviously in other, kind of third world countries and governments to basically elect the people who hired them wanted elected. So these are military psyops people who ran Cambridge Analytica. We all know what happened there with Facebook and all that stuff during the election. This is what goes on behind the scenes. And so you have like all these kind of like fascist ideas popping up here and there, and they all have to do with the defense industry. And it might seem uninvolved in the case of like Cambridge Analytica. It's like, oh, Facebook did that. Facebook was the one who was involved in hacking. It's like, no, these were defense contractors who specialized in psyops around the world to interfere with elections. There's an obvious pattern here, I guess is my point. This guy, Jeffrey Patty, is at kind of the center of all this stuff. And it's really interesting. I never heard anyone talk about him besides me, basically. But he's part of this, I guess what they call like the octopus, with all the different tentacles that reach out. And, the main part of it is hidden. But yeah, I found that really interesting. Hopefully I explained that in a understandable way. But that's I'll probably write an article on that at some point.
Apparently one of Hitler's top commandos was a guy named Otto Skorzeny. And Otto Skorzeny was one of the guys that, in my opinion, lived a full life after World War II. Like, I know he was interrogated by Allied forces, but I think he was let off on some technicality. And I brought him up in an earlier podcast because he's a very interesting guy in not a good way. It's a very unsettling feeling the more you read about this guy and what he did after World War II. And he was one of these guys that was involved with like these fascist states like Spain. And I think he was associated with the Perón regime in South America and training people there. And he was the guy, he rescued Benito Mussolini on like this special mission that was like very dangerous and was given this huge honor. And I just found that was a really intriguing story, dude. I didn't know any of that.
It's hard to kind of wrap your head around. Like there's a lot of threads there that don't really seem like they would connect at all. Like when I saw that this fucking guy was involved in the acquisition of Marconi and Lockheed Electronics and General Electric to be put under BAE, and then he just pieces out and starts the firm that Cambridge Analytica came from. It just blew my mind. And it's clear that there's a network, and this is, I believe, the same network that Peter Levenda talks about and Joseph Farrell talks about. And you can see them pop their heads up every now and then when they get caught. And I think this is the same network that is, trying everything they can in their power to maintain the secrecy internationally.
The hidden hand. Dude, if we're going out, I have to tell this John Keel story about South America because he tells a story. For those unfamiliar, The H Tower, great book, highly recommend it. I think in the United Kingdom it was called A Cosmic Question or The Cosmic Question or something.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
It's the same book. I think, to my knowledge, it's the same book. But I highly recommend this book by John Keel. It wasn't his first book. I think he had already written Our Haunted Planet and Operation Trojan Horse and a few other books. But yeah, he wrote this book, The Eighth Tower, right? And one of the chapters in The Eighth Tower, he's talking about how in the spring of 1936 in Italy, that farmers were complaining that someone was killing their sheep or something was killing their sheep. And the autopsies they were running on these sheep, they couldn't figure out what the fuck was happening and what was killing them. They were just dropping. Okay. And apparently there was, I think it was a diary entry from Rachel Mussolini, the wife of Benito Mussolini, the famous dictator, right? And Rachel Mussolini apparently was told by her husband that on a day in like June, a little after the spring had ended, in a day in June, Benito Mussolini told her, I wouldn't be surprised if something unusual happened today. And it's categorized in the Italian press that there was this weird power outage and all these cars stopped working. And it was like reported in the Italian press that like there was this strange electrical failure occurring in Italy at that time. And so anyways, the Keel says that the incident was widely noted in the press at the time. And at the close of World War II, the Italian press revived the story, adding that the multiple automobile stallings had been caused by sinister secret experiments conducted by none other than Guglielmo Marconi, one of the great geniuses of the 20th century. He had been working on a death ray for Mussolini, the papers claimed, and when he refused to turn the finished papers over to the dictator in 1937, he met with a sudden death. 30 years after the original incident, it was revived once again by one of ufology's characters, a man who called himself Mel Noel. Mr. Noel surfaced in 1965 to 66 during the great UFO wave of the period. He claimed to be a former Air Force pilot who had some unusual experiences with flying saucers in the 1950s. He was an exceptionally handsome man, seemingly sincere, with great charisma, who wore expensive clothes, stayed in the best hotels, and traveled in company of a number of beautiful young ladies. According to his story, a group of great scientists had gone into seclusion somewhere deep in South America where, under the guidance of the wonderful space people, they had constructed a number of workable flying saucers, which they had planned to use for the good of mankind, naturally. He backed his tale with frayed clippings of Marconi's alleged experiments. Marconi was one of the first to stumble on the secrets of the universe after contacting the space people in the 1920s. Instead of being turned over to Mussolini, his notes and apparatus were smuggled out of Italy before the war, according to Noel, presumably reaching the hands of the secret scientific combine in Brazil. And I'll leave it there because that's a long-winded
I do
quote.
remember that.
But that is wild.
Yeah.
And I'm not endorsing everything Mr. Noel said. That could easily be some baloney story. But we do know that there is some strange activity going on in South America, 100%. And I think we're just having a transparency issues. And it's so disappointing to see like conspiracy theories fill in the blanks for some of these topics. But the track record is not looking good based on what I've heard. Like, oh man, I don't know what to make of all this.
That's a hell of a fucking story, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love fucking, of course, like that's so nuts. But then it makes you wonder, like, you know, you see all this stuff. It's like the same ideologies being like astroturfed, but yeah, I don't really want to get into that on the podcast, but we can talk about that.
Yeah.
It's crazy. I wanted to just kind of wrap it up with some of the AMA questions that people submitted.
Nice.
They've kind of been sitting there for a while. Let's go first with underscored. If you had 30 minutes with Tom DeLonge, what would you ask him and why? I would ask him about souls, probably, or probably the hive mind. I think they go hand in hand, but yeah, that's kind of where I'd go through. I'd definitely go through his interviews, and I think those would probably be my choice. What about you?
Oh, I know what I would ask him. I would have two questions for Mr. DeLonge, and I hope I get to ask him one day. The first question would be about Antarctica, because we never get a straight answer about Antarctica. And Tom has said, he's like, I wish I could say more. I wish I could tell you more. And he talks about the relationships of time and just bizarre things going on in Antarctica, a bunch of rumors. So I would love to have clarity from Tom about Antarctica. The other thing I would ask him about is about a man named Bill Tompkins. And I don't know if you know who Bill Tompkins is, but he's a very bizarre individual to research, especially talking about NASA and UFOs. He wrote a book. He wrote a few books about talking about the United States having contact with ETs. and he says that he had a secretary. It feels dumb even explaining it. He said he has a secretary that was an alien that would help him with these projects. And I wanted to ask Tom DeLonge or someone legitimate about some of the claims that Bill Tompkins has made. And because they're so off the wall. And yet I always hear him mentioned when I look and research certain topics. And he talks a lot about like, I'll just leave it at that. I have questions about Bill Tompkins and claims Bill Tompkins has made, because I don't believe Bill Tompkins personally, but I would definitely be curious to ask Tom a couple of his off the wall claims to see if any of them held any water, because that's how disinformation always works, isn't it? It's like little things swirled in with the truth. So that's what I'd ask him.
It's been a good episode. You sound great on your new mic.
Thanks, dude. I'm excited to hear it.
All right. I'll just, thanks everyone for listening to Patterns Tell Stories. We just put out some new artwork that I made with AI and fucking Affinity Photo, and it looks pretty cool, I think. So I'm just going to say goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Thank you. Goodbye. Have a good night.